All right, America, gather round. Let's talk about a man so mysterious, so unpredictable, he makes a David Copperfield show look like an open book. This is the story of Justice David Souter, the Supreme Court justice who pulled off the greatest disappearing act in Washington. He vanished right in front of the Republican Party that put him there. Appointed by President George H.W. Bush, Souter was to be a reliable conservative vote. Think of him as the judicial equivalent of a comfy armchair. Familiar, predictable, doesn't rock the boat. Except someone forgot to check for loose screws. Because once Souter settled into that comfy chair, he started leaning to the left. This wasn't just a gentle recline, people. This was practically horizontal. Abortion rights? Souter said yes. Affirmative action? He was on board. Separation of church and state? He practically built a wall between them. The Republicans were apoplectic. They'd been had. Souter was a wolf in judicial robes, or, to be more accurate, a very polite, bookish sheepdog who just happened to think for himself. So, who was this enigmatic figure who threw a wrench in the gears of American politics? Born in 1939, David Souter was pure New Hampshire granite. He grew up in a small town, went to Harvard, as one does when one is brilliant, and then returned home to become a lawyer and judge. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant legal mind, but also a private man who preferred the company of books and nature to the cocktail parties of Washington. When President Bush nominated him to the Supreme Court in 1990, Souter was such an unknown quantity that he was dubbed the stealth nominee. He had a thin paper trail on controversial issues, which made him the judicial equivalent of a choose-your-own-adventure book. Nobody quite knew where his story would end up. Little did they know, Souter was about to write his own chapter in legal history, and it wouldn't be the one the Republicans had in mind. Now let's talk about this so-called ideological shift. Some folks like to say Souter had a Damascus moment on the Supreme Court, like he was suddenly struck by a bolt of liberal lightning. But the truth is, Souter's shift wasn't so much a sudden conversion as it was a slow and steady realization. He was a deep thinker, a man who believed in the Constitution and the power of precedent. And as he grappled with the complexities of the law, he came to see that his values aligned more with the court's liberal wing than with the increasingly rigid doctrines of the Republican Party. This wasn't about partisan politics for Souter. It was about principle. He believed in individual rights, in equality, in the idea that the government shouldn't be meddling in people's private lives. And he wasn't afraid to stand up for those beliefs, even when it meant disappointing the people who put him on the bench. See, that's the thing about Souter. He was a judge's judge. He wasn't interested in grandstanding or imposing his personal views. He was there to interpret the Constitution, to uphold the law, even when it was hard, even when it was unpopular. He believed in precedent, in the idea that the law should be stable and predictable, but he also recognized that the Constitution is a living document, one that needs to be interpreted in light of contemporary challenges. He was a champion of individual liberty, believing that the government should tread lightly when it came to people's personal choices. He was a staunch defender of the First Amendment, arguing that freedom of speech and religion were essential to a healthy democracy. And he was a strong advocate for the rights of the accused, believing that everyone deserved a fair shake in court, no matter how unpopular they might be. Section 5. The Hermit of the High Court. Now you'd think a man who wielded such influence, who helped shape the legal landscape of a nation, would be a public figure, right? Someone who craved the limelight? Not David Souter. This was a man who, upon retiring from the Supreme Court, hightailed it back to his beloved New Hampshire faster than you could say judicial restraint. He famously shunned technology, preferring the company of books and the great outdoors to the constant buzz of the internet. He didn't own a TV, he didn't use email. He was basically a 21st century Thoreau, minus the whole living in the woods thing. And you know what? Good for him. In a world obsessed with celebrity and self-promotion, Souter was a refreshing reminder that some of the most important work is done quietly, deliberately, and without the need for applause. Section 6. Judgments for the ages and one for the history books. Now, let's talk about some of the big ones, the cases that defined Souter's legacy. He was part of the majority in, which reaffirmed the right to an abortion. He dissented in, arguing that the court's decision to stop the recount in Florida undermined public confidence in the election. And he wrote a scathing dissent in, arguing that allowing corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money on elections would drown out the voices of ordinary Americans. But perhaps his most significant opinion came in, where he wrote the majority opinion striking down laws criminalizing sodomy. It was a landmark decision, not just for LGBTQ+ rights, but for the principle of individual liberty. Souter recognized that the government had no business interfering in people's private lives, and he wasn't afraid to say so. Section 7. Farewell to a Cerebral Giant. When news of Souter's death broke in 2025, the legal world went into mourning. Colleagues, both liberal and conservative, praised his intellect, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to the law. Even those who disagreed with his rulings recognized him as a giant of the judiciary, a man who left an indelible mark on the Supreme Court and the nation. Barack Obama, whose presidency Souter had outlived by more than a decade, issued a statement praising his fair-minded and independent approach to the law. It was a fitting tribute to a man who never let partisan politics cloud his judgment, who always strove to uphold the Constitution, even when it meant going against the grain. Section 8. Souter, the unexpected hero. So, what's the takeaway from the life and legacy of David Souter? Well, for one thing, it's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. Souter was the Republican who became a liberal icon, the stealth nominee who left a very visible mark on American law. He was like the quiet kid in class who ends up writing the best-selling novel, or the underdog team that wins the championship against all odds. Think of it this way. If Souter were a TV show, he'd be like the first season full of surprises, betrayals, and unexpected twists. You think you know where it's going, who the good guys and bad guys are, and then BAM! Souter pulls a Ned Stark and gets beheaded by his own party. Except instead of losing his head, he just kept on judging, quietly and thoughtfully, shaping the future of a nation one case at a time. Section 9. What's your verdict? So, there you have it, America. The story of David Souter, the Republican who surprised everyone, the quiet jurist who became a liberal lion. He was a man of contradictions, a scholar who shunned the spotlight, a judge who believed in the power of precedent but also recognized the need for progress. He was in many ways an enigma, a man who defied easy categorization. But one thing's for sure, he was a true original, and his legacy will continue to be debated, dissected, and admired for generations to come. So what do you think? Was Souter a hero, a traitor, a visionary, a relic of a bygone era? The comment section is open, folks. Let's have it.